Nathaniel Braxton was 41 years old when his wife told him that if he could not handle her spending weekends with her ex-husband, then he was not a real man. For 9 years, he'd been a loyal husband and a quiet, well-regarded orthopedic surgeon at Presbyterian Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. He drove a 2018 Toyota 4Runner with a small dent in the rear bumper from a parking garage incident he'd never bothered to fix. He wore the same brown Timex his father had given him for medical school graduation. He packed almond butter sandwiches for his overnight shifts in a beat-up Stanley lunchbox that his residents joked about. Her tennis friends at the Carmel Country Club called him Quiet Nate, and she never corrected them. On a Thursday evening in late April, at the kitchen island of their house on Sedgewood Circle in Myers Park, Simone Braxton looked at him over the rim of her wine glass and said, "Trevor's going through a hard time with the custody stuff, and I told him I'd go up to Blowing Rock with him this weekend to talk it through. It's just 2 nights. If you can't handle that, Nate, if you can't handle me being an adult with someone I was married to for 4 years, then honestly, you're not a real man." She had no idea that Trevor Halstead had spent the last 14 months siphoning money out of the small orthopedic device startup that Nathaniel had quietly funded him into as a favor, that the custody attorney Trevor had told her about did not exist, and that Nathaniel had received a certified letter from the North Carolina Secretary of State's office on Tuesday morning informing him that his 62% majority equity position in Halstead Orthopedic Innovations gave him the sole legal authority to remove Trevor from the company at any time, with cause, effective immediately. What Simone said at the kitchen island that Thursday night would cost her the marriage, the house, the country club membership she cared more about than she should have, and the friendship of a man she told her sister was probably going to be her second chance. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. on the Friday morning after Simone told him he was not a real man. Nathaniel reached across the bed and turned it off before it made a second sound, because Simone was still asleep, and he had not slept in a way that made him want to explain his face to her. He sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment in the dark. He listened to her breathing on the other side of the bed. It was slow and even, the way it always was, the way it had been every night for 9 years while she slept next to a man she had decided was not. In some way she had never made specific until Thursday, sufficient. He got up. He pulled on his gray running shorts and his old Duke Medicine hoodie and went downstairs. The kitchen was still dark, and the coffee maker clicked on at 5 odd a.m. because he had set it that way when they moved into the house on Sedgewood Circle 7 years ago. He poured the coffee into his thermos, black, no sugar, and screwed the lid tight. He opened the refrigerator and took out the small container of overnight oats he had made the night before, while Simone was at her Pilates class, and he stood at the counter and ate them with a spoon out of the container, watching the sky start to gray through the kitchen window over the sink. He thought about the certified letter from the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. He had opened it Tuesday morning at 7:42 a.m. in the doctor's lounge at Presbyterian before his first case, and he had read it twice, and he had folded it back into its envelope and put it in the inside pocket of his white coat. And he had gone into, or for, and reconstructed a comminuted tibial plateau fracture in a 43-year-old woman who had been hit by a car in the crosswalk at Providence Road. And he had not thought about the letter again until he sat down at the kitchen island Thursday night, and Simone had told him he was not a real man. He thought about Trevor Halstead. He thought about the first time he had met Trevor at a dinner at Simone's parents' house in Wilmington in 2017, 6 months after he and Simone had started dating. Trevor had been Simone's college boyfriend at Chapel Hill, and then her first husband from 2011 to 2015. And Simone's parents had loved Trevor the way parents love a son-in-law, who calls them by their first names and remembers their anniversary. Simone had introduced Nathaniel to Trevor that night as the surgeon I was telling you about, and Trevor had shaken his hand and said, "Nathaniel, I've heard so much." Trevor had been 31 at the time, a broad-shouldered man with a Chapel Hill class ring and a real estate license and a series of small business ideas he was always about to launch. He had told Nathaniel that night that he was working on a medical device concept for post-surgical bracing, something he had been thinking about since his own knee surgery in 2014, and he had asked Nathaniel a series of questions about compression, pressure distribution, and the mechanical failure modes of standard hinged braces, and Nathaniel had answered him the way he answered every honest question about his field, which was completely and specifically. 2 years later, in the summer of 2019, Trevor had called Nathaniel at his office and asked if they could meet for coffee. They had met at Amelie's in Noda on a Tuesday afternoon, and Trevor had brought a business plan, and he had told Nathaniel that he had been developing the brace concept for 4 years, and that he had a prototype and a provisional patent, and a manufacturer in Greensboro who was willing to run a first production batch, and that he needed $300,000 to get to market. Nathaniel had read the business plan. It was not a good business plan, but the underlying concept was sound, and the provisional patent, when Nathaniel had his own attorney review it 2 weeks later, was actually defensible. Nathaniel had gone home that night and told Simone that Trevor had asked him for money, and Simone had said he would never ask if he wasn't sure. Trevor is not the kind of person who asks. Nathaniel had thought about that sentence for a long time. He had structured the deal carefully. His attorney, a woman named Bettina Fry, who had handled his medical practice incorporation and his father's estate, had drafted an operating agreement in which Nathaniel's $300,000 would purchase 62% of the equity in Halstead Orthopedic Innovations LLC, with Trevor holding 33% and a 5% option pool reserved for future employees. Bettina had insisted on a majority position because, as she put it, "You are not investing in a company, Nathaniel. You are investing in a person your wife is emotionally connected to. And the only protection you have against the way that will complicate itself over 5 years is control." Nathaniel had signed the agreement in October 2019. Trevor had signed it 2 days later after his own attorney reviewed it. Simone had never asked to see the paperwork. Nathaniel had mentioned to her once that he had funded Trevor and that the structure gave him majority control, and Simone had said, "That's so nice of you, honey," and had gone back to looking at fabric swatches for the guest bathroom renovation. For the first 3 years, the company had done modestly well. Trevor had shipped the first product line in 2020, and by 2022, the company was doing about $1.4 million in annual revenue with a small margin. Nathaniel had reviewed the quarterly financials Bettina forwarded him and had never once had to intervene. In late 2023, the revenue had started to flatten, and in the first quarter of 2024, it had dropped. Bettina had called Nathaniel in April 2024 and said, "I want you to look at these numbers with me." She had walked him through what she had noticed in the general ledger, which was that consulting expenses paid to a Delaware LLC called Halstead Advisory Group had grown from $12,000 in 2022 to $418,000 in the trailing 12 months, and that Halstead Advisory Group's registered agent was the same address as Trevor Halstead's personal condo in South End. Nathaniel had asked Bettina to bring in a forensic accountant. The accountant, a man named Ruben Okafor, who had done work for 2 of Bettina's other clients, had spent 6 weeks going through the books. And in early June, he had produced a 51-page report that documented, in specific detail, that Trevor Halstead had moved approximately $640,000 out of Halstead Orthopedic Innovations over the previous 14 months. Through a combination of fictitious consulting invoices, inflated expense reimbursements, and one straightforward transfer of $80,000 in December that had been booked as a research and development advance and had never generated any research or development. Rubin had also documented that Trevor had, in March, opened a new LLC called Halstead Medical Devices, Inc., registered in Delaware, and had begun quietly transferring intellectual property assignments from the operating company to the new entity through a series of amendments that Trevor had signed as CEO, but had not disclosed to Nathaniel as majority equity holder. Bettina had called Nathaniel on the 12th of June and said, "Here is what you have. You have documented embezzlement in excess of $600,000. You have documented attempted IP theft. Under the operating agreement you signed in 2019, you have unilateral authority to remove him for cause, void the IP amendments, and pursue civil recovery. If you want to pursue criminal referral, the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office has a white-collar unit that has taken cases smaller than this. I have prepared the removal paperwork. It requires only your signature and a certified letter from the Secretary of State's office confirming the operating agreement remains in force, which I have requested and expect by Tuesday of next week." Nathaniel had told Bettina to prepare everything and hold it. He had not told Simone. He had not told Simone because he had been trying to understand something. He had spent 9 years with a woman who told the story of her first marriage as we grew apart, and who mentioned Trevor's name at dinners the way you mention a weather system that passed through a long time ago. He had spent 9 years watching her stay in touch with Trevor in ways that had always been just slightly more attentive than they should have been. He had spent 9 years telling himself that he was not the kind of man who was jealous of his wife's history, and he had told himself that so many times that he had stopped noticing when the history stopped being history. In February, when Trevor had told Simone he was going through a divorce, Simone had cried at dinner and had said, "He deserves better than her." In March, Simone had started going to lunches with Trevor on Wednesdays that she called catch-ups. In April, Simone had started going to dinners with Trevor on Fridays that she called just checking in. And on Thursday night, at the Kitchen Island, Simone had told her husband that if he could not handle her going to Blowing Rock with Trevor for the weekend, he was not a real man. Nathaniel had received the certified letter from the Secretary of State's office on Tuesday morning at 7:42 a.m. He finished his overnight oats at the counter and rinsed the container and put it in the dishwasher. He picked up his phone. He typed a message to Bettina Fry that said, "I would like to move forward with the removal on Monday morning. Please have everything ready for signature by 7:30 a.m. He put the phone in the pocket of his hoodie. He went upstairs to shower. Simone was still asleep. She would sleep until 8. She had a facial at 9 and a lunch at 11:30 with her friend Palmer. And then she would come home and pack a small overnight bag and drive her white Range Rover up to Blowing Rock to meet Trevor at the Chitola Resort, where she had made the reservation 2 weeks earlier under her own name, which Nathaniel knew because Simone had put the reservation on their joint Amex. He showered. He shaved. He put on a navy suit and a white shirt and no tie because he had no cases that day, only clinic. He kissed Simone lightly on the forehead at 6:38 a.m. because that was what he had done for 9 years, and she stirred slightly and said, "Have a good day, honey," without opening her eyes, and he said, "You, too." He drove to the hospital. He saw 17 patients in clinic that day. At 11:04 a.m., between patients, he stepped into an empty exam room and called Bettina back. He said, "One more thing. I want the removal to be effective at 9 a.m. Monday, I want the notice served to him in person. I do not want him to know it is coming until it is done. Bettina said, I will handle the service through the same firm we used for the Mercer deposition in 2022. They are discreet and they are prompt. Nathaniel said, Thank you. He hung up and went back into the hallway and saw his 11:15. At 5:22 p.m., Nathaniel walked into the house on Sedgewood Circle. Simone was in the master bedroom zipping her overnight bag. She had changed into jeans and a cream cashmere sweater and her Golden Goose sneakers, and she was wearing the pearl earrings her mother had given her for her 30th birthday. She looked up when he came in and said, Oh, you're home early. He said, Clinic finished on time. She said, I'm about to head out. He said, I know. She stopped zipping the bag. She said, Nate, please don't be weird about this. Trevor really needs a friend right now, and I am not going to abandon him because you're feeling insecure. He said, Have a good weekend, Simone. She looked at him for a moment. She had expected an argument. She had prepared for the argument in the mirror that morning while she did her makeup. She had a list of things she was going to say about emotional maturity and about how his mother had raised him to be threatened by strong women. She had rehearsed the sentence, If you can't handle me spending weekends with my ex, you're not a real man, which she had actually first said Thursday night and had liked so much that she had planned to say it again if he pushed back, because she believed it was the kind of sentence that ended arguments in her favor. She said, That's it? He said, That's it. She picked up the bag. She said, I'll be back Sunday night. He said, Drive safely. She walked past him and down the stairs. He heard the front door close. He heard the Range Rover start in the driveway. He heard it back down the driveway and turn onto Sedgewood Circle and drive away. He stood in the bedroom for a moment. Then he went downstairs, and he made himself a turkey sandwich, and he sat at the kitchen island and ate it, and he did not turn on the television, and he did not check his phone, and he ate the sandwich the way he ate every meal, which was completely and without hurry. Saturday morning, Nathaniel drove to Wilmington. It was a 3.5-hour drive down I-40, and he did it in his father's old truck, a 1997 Ford F-250 that he kept in the garage and drove maybe 4 times a year and would never sell. He arrived at his mother's house on Live Oak Parkway at 10:47 a.m. His mother, Odessa Braxton, was 73 years old and had been widowed for 6 years and lived in the house she and Nathaniel's father had bought in 1988. She was sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee when he pulled into the driveway. She looked at him. She said, Come inside. They sat at the kitchen table. She made him coffee. She did not ask him why he had driven 3.5 hours to see her without calling first. She waited. He told her the whole thing. He started with Trevor's request for money in 2019, and he ended with Simone telling him he was not a real man. It took him about 40 minutes. His mother did not interrupt. When he finished, she said, How long has she been sleeping with him? He said, I don't know for certain that she has. She said, Nathaniel. He said, I don't know for certain. She said, You know. He said, Yes, since March, I think. Possibly February. She said, And on Monday you are removing him from the company. He said, Yes. She said, And what are you doing about Simone? He said, On Monday afternoon, after Trevor has been served, I am going to meet Bettina at her office and sign a divorce petition, which she will file first thing Tuesday morning. Simone will be served at the country club on Tuesday, around noon, in front of the friends she has spent the last 4 years making by telling them about her charming surgeon husband. Bettina has already prepared the settlement offer. Simone will be offered the equity in her Pilates studio that I funded in 2021. the 2022 Range Rover, her personal effects, and $180,000 in cash. She will waive any interest in the house, the medical practice, the Halstead investment, my father's estate, and my retirement accounts. Because North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, and Bettina structured our finances from the beginning around the assumption that this day might come. His mother said, "You planned this from the beginning." He said, "I did not plan this. Bettina planned it." In 2016, before I proposed, I asked Bettina to look at my situation the way she would look at a client's situation, and she told me to keep the house I bought in 2015 in a revocable trust in my name only, to keep the medical practice as a professional corporation, with my father listed as a founding shareholder, because he had co-signed the initial line of credit, to keep the Halstead investment through the same trust when I made it in 2019, and to keep every asset I built during the marriage documented as separate property or as an appreciation of separate property. I did all of that. I did not do any of it because I expected this. I did it because Bettina told me it was what a careful person did, and I have always been a careful person. His mother said, "Your father was careful too." He said, "I know." She said, "Nathaniel, are you going to be all right?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Are you going to make sure Simone understands?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Don't be cruel. Be exact." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "And Trevor?" He said, "Trevor is going to be prosecuted." Bettina spoke to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's white-collar unit on Wednesday. They reviewed Rubin's report. They are prepared to bring charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty as soon as I file the civil complaint on Monday afternoon, which will make the underlying evidence part of the public record and give them the predicate they need. Trevor will likely be arrested by Wednesday of next week. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Simone told you that you were not a real man." He said, "Yes," she said. "She has spent 9 years married to a man who saves people's lives with his hands and who has never raised his voice at her. And she looked at him on Thursday and told him he was not a real man because he did not want her to spend the weekend with a criminal she used to be married to." He said, "Yes," she said. "Nathaniel." She built a picture. She lived inside that picture for 9 years, and she never once asked whether the picture was true, and now the picture is going to end, and she is going to spend the rest of her life explaining to people what happened, and she is not going to be able to explain it, because she never once bothered to know what she was actually married to. He said, "Yes." His mother reached across the table and put her hand on his. She said, "You go on home. You do what needs to be done. And you come see me next weekend, and we will not talk about any of this. And we will sit on the porch and I will make you shrimp and grits, and you will remember that you were raised by 2 people who loved you the specific and correct way, and that you have always been a real man, and that no one gets to tell you otherwise, especially not a woman who was married to a thief." He said, "Yes, ma'am." He drove back to Charlotte Saturday afternoon. He arrived at the house on Sedgwood Circle at 6:11 p.m. Simone did not call. He knew she would not call. He made himself pasta, and he watched a college basketball game, and he went to bed at 10:30 p.m., and he slept for the first time since Tuesday. On Sunday, he did laundry. He mowed the lawn. He fixed the loose board on the back deck he had been meaning to fix since October. He went for a run through Freedom Park at 4:11 p.m. and did 4 miles at a comfortable pace. Simone came home at 8:47 p.m. She dropped her bag in the foyer. She came into the kitchen where he was reading a journal article at the island, and she said, "It was good. He's really working through some things." He said, "That's good, Simone." She said, "Have you eaten?" He said, "Yes," she said. I'm going to shower. He said, "Okay." She went upstairs. He read for another 40 minutes. Then he went upstairs, and he brushed his teeth, and he got into bed on his side, and Simone was already asleep, or was pretending to be asleep, and he turned off the light. He was in his office at Presbyterian at 6:45 a.m. Monday morning. At 7:30 a.m., he called Bettina. She said, "The process server is meeting Trevor at his office at 9 a.m. He does not know he is being served. He believes he is being visited by a potential investor Ruben's colleague introduced last Friday. Once he is served, the removal is effective immediately. The locks on the office will be changed by 9:15. Ruben and 2 of his people are on site to secure the servers and the physical documents. The civil complaint will be filed at the courthouse at 10:30 a.m. The DA's office will receive the filing at 11 a.m. And I expect an arrest warrant to be issued by Friday, though it may come faster," Nathaniel said, "and the divorce." Bettina said, "I have blocked out 1 p.m. for you at my office. Come straight from the hospital. The petition is ready. The settlement offer is drafted. Simone will be served at 12:15 p.m. tomorrow at the Carmel Country Club during her regular Tuesday tennis clinic, per your instructions." Nathaniel said, "Change that." Bettina said, "To what?" Nathaniel said, "Serve her at home. Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. I do not want her humiliated in front of her friends at the country club. I do not want that story to be the story." Bettina was quiet for a moment. She said, "Nathaniel." He said, "Yes," she said. "That is the right call." He said, "Wednesday at 8 a.m. at the house. I will be at the hospital by 7. He hung up. He saw his first case of the day at 7:30 a.m., a rotator cuff repair on a 58-year-old carpenter who had torn it lifting a bag of Kikret. He was in the OR when Trevor Halstead was served at 9:04 a.m. at the Halstead Orthopedic Innovations offices on West Moorhead Street. Trevor had been sitting in the small conference room with what he believed was a potential investor when the process server entered and handed him the removal notice and the civil complaint draft. The process server had been instructed to say only, "Miss Halstead, you have been served," and to leave. Trevor had read the first page. He had stood up. He had tried to walk into his own office. Ruben Okafor and 2 colleagues had been waiting in his office. Ruben had said, "Mr. Halstead, per the notice you have just been served, you no longer have authorized access to these premises or to any company systems. Your personal effects will be boxed and delivered to your residence by the end of the business day. Please leave the building." Trevor had stood there for approximately 11 seconds. Then he had walked out through the reception area, past his own employees, who had all been notified by email at 9 a.m. that a change in leadership was in effect, and he had gotten into his black BMW X5, and he had sat in the driver's seat for a long time before he had driven away. He had called Simone at 9:47 a.m. Simone had been in the middle of a pedicure. She had let it go to voicemail. He had called again at 9:51 a.m. Simone had let it go to voicemail. He had texted her at 9:54 a.m., and the text had said, "Call me. Something has happened." Simone had texted back, "Can it wait till noon?" He had not responded. He had driven to a Starbucks in Dilworth, and he had sat in the parking lot in his car for 2 hours, trying to understand what had just happened to his life. Nathaniel finished his last case at 12:38 p.m. He drove to Bettina's office at 1 p.m. He signed the divorce petition. He signed the civil complaint against Trevor. He signed a series of trust amendments Bettina had prepared to move the Halstead equity into a new holding structure. He was out of her office by 1:47 p.m. He drove back to the hospital and saw his afternoon clinic. Tuesday, he worked. Simone was quiet at home Tuesday night. She had spoken to Trevor at 6:30 p.m. and had learned what had happened. She had not raised it with Nathaniel because she was still processing what Trevor had told her, which was a version of events in which Trevor had been the victim of a hostile takeover by a bitter husband. Simone had believed him, because she had spent 9 years believing Trevor when he told her stories about the ways the world had disappointed him. At 8 a.m. Wednesday morning, Nathaniel was already at the hospital. Simone was in her robe at the kitchen island drinking coffee when the doorbell rang. She answered it. The process server, a woman in a navy pantsuit, said, "Mrs. Braxton, you have been served," and handed her the divorce petition and the settlement offer. She left. Simone read the first page in the foyer. She sat down on the bottom step of the staircase. She read the second page. She read the third page. She called Nathaniel's cell phone at 8:14 a.m. He was scrubbing in for a bilateral knee replacement. He did not answer. He would not answer for the rest of the day. At 5:32 p.m., Nathaniel came home. Simone was sitting at the kitchen island. She had not changed out of her robe. She had a wine glass in front of her that was empty, and a bottle of Sancerre next to it that was half gone. Her mascara had run, and had been wiped, and had run again. When he walked into the kitchen, she looked up at him. She said, "Nate," he said, "Simone." She said, "I do not understand what is happening." He said, "You have been served with a divorce petition and a settlement offer. Your attorney, whoever you retain, should respond within 30 days. Bettina Fry is representing me. The offer expires in 14 days, at which point it will be withdrawn, and we will proceed to full discovery." She said, "Nate, please sit down." He sat down across from her at the island. She said, "Trevor called me last night, and he said you took the company from him. He said you fabricated evidence." Nathaniel said, "Trevor embezzled $640,000 from a company I own 62% of. He attempted to transfer the intellectual property to a shell entity he registered in Delaware in March. He will be arrested by the end of this week. Everything he has told you is a lie. Every version of every story he has told you for the past 14 months has been a lie. Some of the versions of the stories he told you before that were also lies. I have known specifically about the embezzlement since April. I have known that he was going to be a problem since 2019, which is why I structured the deal the way I did. I did not tell you any of this because I was trying to understand what you would do." She said, "Nate, oh my God. Nate, I did not know." He said, "Which part did you not know?" She said, "The money, the embezzlement." "Nate, I would never have." He said, "Simone, on Thursday you told me that if I could not handle you going to Blowing Rock with Trevor for the weekend, I was not a real man. Did you go to Blowing Rock with Trevor for the weekend?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Did you have separate rooms?" She was quiet. He said, "Did you have separate rooms, Simone?" She said, "No." He said, "How long?" She said, "Nate." He said, "How long?" She said, "Since February." He said, 6 weeks before you told me I was not a real man." She said, "Nate." He said, "Simone, I supported everything you did. I paid off your student loans in 2018. I funded your Pilates studio in 2021. I bought this house in your dream neighborhood. I went to every one of your parents' birthdays and every one of your sister's kids' baptisms. I sat through 9 years of dinners where your friends called me Quiet Nate, and I did not correct them, because I did not need them to know who I was. I needed you to know who I was. And you decided at some point, I do not know when, that you had figured out who I was, and you decided that who I was not enough for you. and you did not have the courage to say that to me. You just started sleeping with the man you used to be married to, and when I did not confront you, you decided that meant I was weak. You told me on Thursday that I was not a real man because you needed to believe that the reason you were doing what you were doing was that I was insufficient. It was easier than believing that you were the kind of person who could do this to a person like me. She was crying. She said, "Nate, please, I love you." He said, "Simone, I need you to understand something. You bet that I would fold. You bet that even if I found out, I would be too invested, too settled, too afraid of the disruption to my life to do anything about it. You looked at a man who had spent 9 years being kind to you, and you decided that kindness was smallness. You looked at a man who had spent 9 years being patient with you, and you decided that patience was weakness. You looked at a surgeon who has held the tibias of 42 people back together this year, and you decided that the reason he did not raise his voice at you was that he could not. You were wrong about all of it. I need you to understand who you decided to underestimate." He stood up. He said, "The offer is generous, Simone. It is generous because I do not want the rest of my life to be about explaining this to people, and I do not want you to have to spend the next 20 years being the woman who lost everything. Take the offer. Sign the papers. Move out by the 15th. Do not contact Trevor. Do not contact me except through Bettina. Do not attempt to speak to my mother. She does not want to hear from you." He picked up his keys. He said, "I will be at the Ballantine Marriott tonight. I will be back Friday afternoon. I would like the house to be quiet when I come back." He walked out. He did not slam the door. By the end of that week, Trevor Halstead had been arrested at his condo in South End on Friday morning at 6:47 a.m. He was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. He was released on a $50,000 bond posted by his mother, who had taken a home equity line against her house in Southern Pines. His attorney, a public defender because Trevor had no money to retain private counsel, advised him to accept a plea. The plea was entered in September. Trevor received 48 months in federal custody at Butner Low, with the possibility of parole after 30. He would be released in the summer of 2027. His mother would visit him twice. Simone signed the settlement offer on the 9th day. She retained an attorney named Camille Ostrowski, who read the offer and told her, on the phone, "Miss Braxton, I could take this to discovery. If I do, we will spend 18 months and approximately $240,000 of your money on legal fees, and at the end of it, based on how your husband's attorney has structured his assets, you will receive approximately what has been offered to you today, minus my fees. My advice is to sign. My advice is also to consider very carefully what you say to anyone about this for the next 5 years." Simone signed. She kept the Pilates studio, the Range Rover, her personal effects, and the $180,000 in cash. She moved out on the 14th into a 2-bedroom rental in Plaza Midwood. Her country club membership, which had been in Nathaniel's name, lapsed on July 1st when he did not renew it. Her tennis friends stopped inviting her to lunch by August. Her sister called her in October and said, "Simone, I love you, but I need you to know that Mom and Dad have decided they cannot see you at Thanksgiving. Nathaniel is going to be at their house, because Nathaniel has been at their house every Thanksgiving for 9 years. And Dad said Nathaniel is more his son now than Trevor ever was. I am so sorry." Simone did not go to Thanksgiving. She spent it at her rental in Plaza Midwood. She ordered Chinese food. She looked at a photograph on her phone that she had taken of Nathaniel in 2017, standing on the beach at Wrightsville in a gray t-shirt, holding a coffee, laughing at something her father had said. And she tried to remember, specifically, when she had stopped seeing him. She could not remember. She had never noticed it happening. That was the answer. She had built a picture of a man who was quiet Nate, who packed almond butter sandwiches, who wore a Timex his father gave him, who drove a Toyota. And she had lived inside that picture for so long that she had forgotten to look at the man himself. And when Trevor had reappeared in February, tall and loud and smelling of the cologne she had first smelled at 19, she had mistaken familiarity for truth. She had decided that the man she had been married to for 9 years was the small one, and that the man who had been divorced from her for 8 was the real one. And she had been wrong about both of them, in ways she was only beginning to understand. Nathaniel drove down to Wilmington the Saturday after Thanksgiving. His mother made him shrimp and grits. They sat on the porch. She did not ask him about Simone. He did not offer. At one point in the late afternoon, she said, "How's the practice?" He said, "Good. We're hiring another partner in January. A woman from Hopkins. She's very sharp." She said, "And the company?" He said, "Ruben and I brought in a real CEO in July. A woman named Priya Achari. She was at Smith & Nephew for 12 years. Revenue is up 38% since Trevor left. We are opening a second manufacturing line in Greensboro in March." She said, "And you?" He said, "I am all right, Mama." She said, "Are you going to date?" He said, "Not yet." She said, "When you do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to tell any of it. You are a whole person now, and you were a whole person before, and no one gets to have the ledger of you unless you decide to hand it to them." He said, "Yes, ma'am." They sat on the porch and watched the light go long across the yard, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Later that evening, Nathaniel drove back to Charlotte. He arrived at the house on Sedgewood Circle at 9:14 p.m. He parked in the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, listening to it tick as it cooled. He got out. He went inside. He hung his jacket in the mudroom. He walked through the empty kitchen, past the island where Simone had told him he was not a real man, and out onto the back deck. It was cold. He could see his breath. He stood at the railing with his hands in his pockets and looked out at the yard, at the loose board he had fixed in April, at the dogwood tree his father had helped him plant the first weekend he had owned the house, at the sky above the tree line, which was clear and starred and enormous. He did not look back at the house. He did not need to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.